Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We'll get started in just a few minutes to allow a few more people to join. But thanks for joining us for our webinar, Accelerating AI in Publishing, Building LLM-Powered Customer Experiences in 120 Days. Hi, everyone. If you're just joining us, we'll get started in about 1 minute. But thank you for joining us for our webinar on building AI applications in the publishing industry, but really broadly applicable to all. All right, I think we can get started. So hi, everyone. My name is Loretta Shen. I am on the product marketing team here at DeepSet. I spent a lot of my time talking to our customers, to the larger market, as well as interfacing with our product team, et cetera, to help bring product applications to life. And really, we're at DeepSet, we're all about helping enterprises, helping people build AI applications. And so really excited to be here today to walk you through a little bit of what we see in the market. And even more excited to welcome Dan here from YPulse, one of our customers, but who will be sharing his own story and journey around building AI applications. And Dan, I'll give you a quick second to introduce yourself as well.
Oh, great. So Dan Coates, president, co-founder of YPulse. We're a B2B information publisher. So we focus on youth, informing companies, really big companies, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, YouTube, American Eagle Outfitters, Abercrombie & Fitch, and the like, on what young people are thinking and doing across 7 countries and 2 regions of the world.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. And yeah, it's great to see such a global audience here today, and really excited to share your story. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So this session is being recorded, so you'll be able to get the recording afterwards. Please use the Zoom Q&A function for any of your questions. We will have some time at the end to answer anything that comes up. And then we will share a quick survey at the end. So if you have any feedback, definitely let us know there. Today, we really hope to kind of go over a lot of different topics, but give you a sense of the generative AI landscape and how we see it, and really just dive into building AI applications. So how we see AI being adopted in enterprises, what does that look like? What are the different phases? A few best practices on how to get started, and then really spending a lot of our time with YPulse's AI journey, and learning more about what you can do to move quickly to understand use cases, understand value, and get something out to market. So I think that's going to be a really great part of the webinar as well. So without further ado, I'll just get started to hopefully give some context about, who we are and why we're here today. And so that really starts with, this explosion of generative AI in the past few years. So, and really where DeepSet fits in that journey as well. So, I think it really all started in 2017 when Google kind of published this seminal paper on transformer models. That's where DeepSet came onto the scene. We started to build NLP backend services to large enterprises. And from that, we kind of took all of our learning and experiences and launched our open source framework for building AI applications to help people kind of in a controlled way build applications through components and AI pipelines. And from our work with our open source community, we found that, there it was a need for people to have some more infrastructure and out-of-the-box tools to develop AI applications. And that's kind of where DeepSeek Cloud was born, and our enterprise product. And this all happened around the same time as, this major inflection point in November 2022 of ChatGPT 3.5 being released, and really the larger massive market awareness. Okay, now this is ready for prime time. People want to start using it, and you have tons and tons of consumers now interacting with a chat app and with an LLM. And so where that takes us to now is in 2024 is the market has responded. There's now been an explosion of innovation in the space. We have a broad ecosystem of AI tools, and now businesses are trying to see how can they customize all these different tools to their use cases, and build these compound AI stacks. So how do you kind of build architecture that takes the best in class of any type of AI tooling? How do you work with different LLMs? So it's not just OpenAI on the scene anymore. You have Mistral, you have Anthropic, you have a number of open source providers as well. There are many very reputable and very highly performing models out there now for people to choose from, and you might have different needs depending on what you're trying to do and your organizational requirements. And beyond that, even just interacting with LLMs, we're starting to see use of different types of data, of a multimodal infrastructure being put into place, also going into agentic systems. So how do you get LLMs to help you conduct tasks? How do you create kind of like looping frameworks within your application so that it's not necessarily a linear journey all the time where a user asks a question and gets an answer, but maybe along the way, different things are taken into account before you actually get to the output. And really, what's so exciting is that there's so many different possibilities now with AI, and the ecosystem is in place to support it. We just now have to bring it all together. And that's actually where we sit in this kind of broad ecosystem of tons of infrastructure and powerful technology, is that we kind of sit in the middle layer of how do you kind of bring everything together in the service of then configuring, orchestrating, evaluating, and deploying the power of AI with your data to then create those business applications customized specifically to your use cases. So how do you provide that infrastructure and tooling to then turn the power of the LLM into something usable for your end users? And so we see a lot of different integrations. We work with a lot of different models, and really we're deeply embedded in the ecosystem. So that gives us a kind of a unique view into what people are building, as well as what's coming down in the pipeline as well. So beyond that, I think we talk to prospects and our customers every day about what are your AI goals and challenges, and there are a few common themes, but even from some recent studies, which we'll share here in the chat, just if you're curious and diving in yourself, I did a quick Google on what are the most recent AI trends, and found a study from EY from just this month, and then another study from Intel at the end of last year, December 2023. And the broad themes are that enterprises have high expectations of AI. So it's the number one priority to adopt this. There's tons of investment going into it. I think in the EY study, it said 95% of senior leaders are currently investing in AI. And that investment matters. Of those investing more than 5%, they are seeing increased returns compared to those who invest less. And they're focusing on balancing custom AI development and also working with ready-made AI products. So there's a lot of interest in investing in AI, but how do you actually make that usable? And that's actually where the number one challenge comes in is like, you may be experimenting with AI and you may be prototyping, but how do you actually get that into production at scale to your end users so that it starts to provide value? And in this same study, so you can see here, just 10% of organizations in 2023 from the sample launched generative AI solutions into production in their companies if they were investing in AI. And only 3/4 of responses have, actually, so the vast majority of those respondents, also 3/4, said that they hadn't deployed Gen AI models to production yet. And so really there's a lot of different challenges that stand in the way, but they're all kind of related to infrastructure, technology, resources. Do they have the right technology in place to help them achieve these goals? Do they know how to properly develop their models, tune them? Can they scale? And beyond that, do you have the right skill sets in place? That was another thing that came up of how do you hire in the right people and train the right technical skills to support this new set of tools that have burst onto the scene? How do you then implement them, et cetera? And how do you manage those costs? And then kind of underlying all of that is you may have the technology in place, you might have the budget, you might even have the team in place and the technical know-how, but do you have repeatable processes along the way that help you really scale those applications and make sure that they're production ready and secure and relevant to your customers? So two really interesting studies to check out in terms of if you want to dive deeper into specific issues and challenges, but it's really a broad range of technology and resources and processes that need to be solved before you can kind of start to move more effectively through AI application building. And from our perspective, there's typically three phases of AI adoption and maturity. In that exploration phase, you might just be responding to your CEO saying, hey, we need to implement AI. All of our competitors are doing it. How do we do that? And then how do we actually identify a valid business use case? Or maybe you have a sense of what you want to do. You want to create a chatbot to talk to your customer as a customer service resource, or you want to create a knowledge base of information within your company. But what's the actual ideal architecture and technical solution to solve that? You might still be trying to figure out that and map that out. And then even beyond that, like we mentioned earlier in the top challenges, do you have the teams in place? Have you assigned people to the right roles? And what additional resources do you need? So we see a lot of people in that early exploration phase of trying to figure out how they're going to use AI. And then next is the prototyping phase. So maybe you have established a workable use case, but then how do you start to make sure that it's valuable to your end users? How do you set it up with the right data? How do you find the best tool possible so that you can explain to your organization, this is the most performant application that's been tested multiple times, that's going to, and using the latest technology, and this is why we think it's the best solution. A lot of interest, we see a lot of interest in testing out Claude versus GPT-4o versus open source models, and then how do each of those compare in cost and scale? So those are all different things that need to happen in the prototype phase so that you can then understand what the ultimate impact and cost is going to be of your application. And beyond that, it's all about also how do you bring in the right people? You can't develop products in a vacuum. So in that testing, in that prototyping phase, it's super important to understand how to collaborate across teams and bring in input from your entire business and from your customers and end users as well. And finally, even if you have all those things in place, launching into production is scary. You have something that's a bit of an unknown. It's an LLM that has a lot of its own knowledge and own power. And so how do you actually know when it's ready for production? How do you also know that you're going to be able to handle all the scale within your resources and budget to support usage of the app? And beyond that, how do you know all the answers are going to be correct? How do you know they're going to be coming from your knowledge base, your set of information? Or how do you know that the LLM is not going to hallucinate an answer if it doesn't find the right answer within your corpus? So those are all things that we see and questions that we see typically asked at different phases. And really, a vast majority of companies kind of are evenly split along the AI journey here. And so here at DeepSec Cloud, that's what we're here to do. We're here to help along the way. So typically, we engage a lot with the market on how do you explore use cases? How do you map things to business value? What are the right types of system designs if you're trying to build a retrieval augmented generation app versus more simple question and answering app? What kind of teams and resources do you need to be successful and things like that? And then beyond that, with our platform, we have pre-built tools to help you automatically index your data, to create what we call AI pipelines, which is like the infrastructure beneath an AI application, and really to focus on what matters, testing the right prompts, bringing in user feedback, and running experiments with your apps, and then helping you launch at scale with different types of tools to integrate into your front end, and then ongoing usage monitoring, being able to understand groundedness, which means, how grounded are your answers to reality versus perhaps being hallucinated, and then just kind of providing the infrastructure to help scale usage and understand optimization points in the customer journey. So I'll dive right into a few best practices that we've seen across many different customer journeys, and from many, and also drawn from our team's experience as NLP engineers. And the first is prioritizing use cases. So what does that look like? Really, when you're in that exploration phase, finding that use case that you want to start with is super important. And a great way to do that is to bring stakeholders into a room and just have a brainstorming session. What are your challenges? What are our top challenges within the organization? What are pain points that we actually feel from different departments? And start to brainstorm a list of things that could potentially be solved by with the use of LLMs. So what processes could be automated? What things, what kind of information is trapped that we want to disseminate more broadly? And then make sure that you're actually solving a real problem with each use case and actually be able to define what that looks like. So if you're building, for example, an internal copilot, what does that mean? That's a knowledge base, a chatbot that then allows you to chat with all of your sales documentation, all of your previous RFPs, all of your deal information to better understand how to pitch to a certain vertical, or perhaps it's a customer service knowledge base that helps you sort through all of the documentation and previous best practices to share the best plan forward for your audience. And you should always ask yourself two questions. How valuable would it be if this problem was solved, and how much effort will it take? And there's actually a happy medium. So you may think that you always want to go for the highest value use case. Let's say there's a super robust and complex agent that you want to build that can traverse departments, traverse internal, external, and kind of understand who they're talking to and solve different problems for end users. But that would take a lot of time to first understand what's the scope of that, and then also then to build out with all the different types of technologies that then would support it. At the same time, maybe something simple that's fast, like a quick email filter that your LLM can then help you kind of organize your information more clearly. Is that, in a very individualistic use case, does that scale? And really, maybe you want to kind of get into this middle ground area where you have something that's going to have a lot of impact. So let's say that internal copilot use case, because you're going to be able to talk to a lot of different teams and departments internally. And because it's enclosed within your internal group, it's going to be less effort to launch and test, et cetera, versus a customer copilot that you might want to launch after you've kind of ironed out the kinks with your internal solution. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but try to optimize for both, time to prototyping as well as, of course, end user value at the end of the day. The next best practice is collecting feedback early. So typically when you think about application development and building, you look at the technical side. So you may be working with your data science team to figure out what the best way is to index and process all your data for use with the LLM, maybe even looking at fine-tuning your models, et cetera. And then, of course, your product engineering teams are going to get to work configuring your application, building it, coding, and then evaluating to see if it's useful, and testing out to see if it works, and then finally deploying it and then monitoring performance. Like that's all kind of expected of technical teams. But what you can do to ensure success and to kind of shorten feedback cycles, et cetera, post launches, to infuse feedback across the development cycle. So we encourage all AI builders to first align on use case, from that first best practice with your business stakeholders. So understand the business context that you're working within so that you can bring in the right data sets, validate that those data sets are actually the ones that are to be used. So if you're talking to your marketing department, is this the most recent set of information that we should be loading into the system so that it's valuable to you? Or is this actually outdated and actually we should focus our attention elsewhere? Those are all things that are super helpful to define early on. And then even throughout the process, because LLMs are so interactive and because, you're best suited to kind of test them as you build, you should actually bring your end users into the configuration and evaluation process. So what are the right types of prompts that you should be using to prompt your application? What are the questions that we should be asking? What are the different ways to ask it to get the right response? Those are all things that your end users can help you do because they actually have the subject matter expertise to ask nuanced, interesting questions that can then produce a useful response. And all of their feedback then actually goes into tuning the model to be more performant for your application. And then on the other side, when you have a more built out product and a front end for people to interact with, you also, of course, want your end users working through the user experience, doing some UX testing, just to see that it all works and that it is a valuable and delightful product that they would want to use in their day-to-day. And finally, through the deployment and launch phase, you just want to have that continuous performance feedback on all those topics, on if the prompts are valuable, if the app is delivering the right information that's relevant to you as a user of the product, and what else can be done to make it better, whether that's with more relevant answers, with better accuracy. Those are all things that you can rate and then bring back into your application development process. Our third best practice is to work iteratively. So kind of building on the last two topics, you don't have to solve everything at once. And it actually is, we've seen more success in our customers and our partners working in small initial deployments and then continuously optimizing along the way. So what does that look like? It could look like a use case basis. So maybe you're building a simple chat at first to just test out how can we how can we help our internal teams use LLMs to gain more information? But then you realize, okay, well, actually, I want to build in, I want it to be built on our proprietary knowledge. Of course, the LLM doesn't have all of our own company information. So I want to create a retrieval augmented generation app, which is essentially builds its information off documents that are provided to it. And so maybe you test that out and build on top of your QA structure. And then maybe you find that, okay, our end users are telling us, well, this is fine, but I don't trust the answers. I feel like something's off. And so you actually want to then enhance that app with responding with citations. And that's another modular development that you can add to your app so that you end at the most performant use case, but you along the way, you're able to test different concepts, get feedback, and then not get stuck on providing the perfect solution right off the bat. On the other hand, another way to look at working iteratively and building incrementally is to integrate data one at a time. So that could be starting with a specific business unit and working off their data set, or it could be working with a specific database that houses your data for this department, and then another database down the line that has different requirements, and making sure that you can work with one system first before you switch to the next. Or it could be just one table within your database. So we see customers, using Snowflake, and they have a table that has most of their business, like their sales data, and they have another table that has more like marketing data, et cetera. And so why don't you start with one set of data and then you move on and make sure it works. And then eventually you have a conversational BI tool that traverses lots of different data sets, but you can build along the way and just ensure success step by step. And finally, this may seem obvious, but I kind of mentioned it earlier. Really, the innovators of the AI space are being made now, and you can only benefit from starting now and building that AI competency across your organization. So, because building trustworthy systems takes time, and getting to know the models, getting to know how things work together, getting to know how to customize things specific to your business, and building those processes, repeatable processes, develop products takes time. So typically, we see on a regular timeline of when you're trying to learn the technology, learn the industry, et cetera, you might take 3 months to build a shareable prototype, and then another few quarters to actually evaluate it, optimize it, get people into the cycle to test it, evaluate it, build that iterative product. And then finally, maybe it'll be a year out, and then that's when you launch it to your end users and really start to try to promote adoption like you would with any other product launch. And then at that point, you're a year out, and then you're building your second app and your third app. And you do have compound knowledge gains, so you can start to move faster. But we also see that, investing in technology and tooling and infrastructure, as those previous studies implied, can really help shorten the time to value and time to adoption. And so maybe you spend that same first 3 months really understanding how AI is going to work in your organization. You can build the prototype at the same time. Then you can shorten the cycles around, with evaluation tools, with testing tools, with monitoring tools, to get to the point where you're actually launching straight into production and your customer base within 6 months, and then you can spend all your time on adoption and ongoing optimization, and then start that concurrent process of building new products and processes with AI earlier, and just kind of getting a head start with your products and competency. That's our big encouragement, to just start experimenting and learning now. There's tons of resources out there. And yeah, it's a really exciting time to be building with AI. So quick recap on DeepSet. We are a full platform for developing mission critical applications. So we have a unified platform for developing, testing, and deploying LLM applications, like a lot of specific tools for pipeline management, prompt testing, and scaling, et cetera. a big part of what we want to do is help organizations build quality applications that they are confident in, that can also, and also that internal knowledge to be able to continue to scale AI processes and products through a framework that helps you swap out different models, test out different technologies without breaking your system. So very flexible and composable. And then also being that partner for organizations and sharing our AI expertise so that, you feel like you have someone to bounce ideas off of and to guide you along this development cycle. But that's the deep set overview, as well as, what we're seeing in the market, what we see people are interested in, as well as what people are building. But I'm, super excited to welcome Dan to actually show us how that looks in real life and show us how YPulse built their LLM-powered application in less than 120 days. So Dan, I will pass it off to you.
Yeah. And all of those slides really resonated. The nice thing is that when we came to Deep Set, you had sort of a lot of guidance for us, some best practices, some tips. And naive as we were, we just followed them all to the letter. And that's what gave us this tremendous result of having a fully developed application and, might I add, first paying customer in under 120 days. So as I'd mentioned before, we're a B2B information services provider, and so we're awash in data. We've got more data than we know what to do with. And so what we wanted to create was a co-pilot, so a youth insights co-pilot that would allow us to save our customers time, really. And if we move on to the next slide, you'll see that our customers aren't tiny, right? We're a mouse dancing with elephants, and it's really rewarding that we have such big clients, but there's a couple of sides to that maybe it isn't so obvious. Once you've got a customer like Apple, you don't want to lose that customer ever. And so a lot of time and energy goes into landing these customers, years sometimes. And so you really just want to keep them happy and not give them any reason to go anywhere else. And so go to the next slide. Our goals in all of this were responding to our customers' needs, right? We wanted to keep them satisfied. We wanted to keep them engaged, consuming our insights, our data, our reports, and we wanted to make sure that we were delivering a quality experience. Our clients love us, and so they're relatively tolerant, but a lot of them are big tech firms. I mean, all of Apple, Meta, and Microsoft are clients of ours, and so they know a thing or two about AI. We really didn't want to stumble coming out of the gate. We wanted to be able to have a quality experience from day one. And then, the media, technology, and entertainment business has been in a bit of a slump over the last 2 years. And so if you read, Harvard Business Review and a number of other publications, they'll tell you that the companies that prosper during a comeback or a rebound are the ones that innovate and launch new products and time that really at the start of a recovery. And so that was on our minds as we were building this tool. It was like, wouldn't it be great if we built a tool that was really valuable to our customers just at a time when budgets are starting to unfreeze and people are starting to move forward instead of this bit of a winter that we've been living in for the past 2 years. And so the next slide kind of talks a little bit about how we conducted a customer engagement survey. We do this every year. And in that engagement survey, hundreds of folks will tell us the things that they love about us and the things that they wish that we could do better. We had a long list of things that we could do better. And a lot of it had to do with just time, right? People want to spend less time, getting to value than they used to before. Everybody in the technology, media, entertainment world, there's been cutbacks and layoffs. They're doing 2, sometimes 3 people's jobs, and they just don't have time. We looked at what it took to sort of stay current with all of the stuff that we publish, and it was taking between 10 and 12 hours a week for our customers to be able to just keep up with everything that we were producing. And there was this interesting kind of unintended consequence to that, is that they felt guilty if they missed anything. They never knew what gold might be in any given article that we wrote or report that we published. And so they wanted to stay current and stay up to date with everything that we were doing, and yet they just didn't have, 25% of their week to be able to dedicate to us. So looking across all of the things that they told us, the number one problem they were having was they needed faster time to insight. And we collected some really personal stories about how, one of our longest standing and most valuable clients to us was asked, late in the day on a Thursday, to give some talking points to the C-suite, for a meeting that was going to occur the next morning on Friday. And so, um, you know, uh, basically what you had to do is spend 4 hours, combing through, keyword searching through all of our reports, read a report, what's relevant from this one, read another report, what's relevant from that one. And keyword search doesn't really cut it anymore. There's this phenomenon where, you know, uh, you could keyword search for something like beer, but it wouldn't quite know that that was related to alcoholic beverages, wouldn't know that that was related to dry January, wouldn't relate to the abstinence movement that's sweeping through young people. And so what a lot of our customers were finding is that we were having to use the limitations of keyword search to kind of get in the right direction and then read an awful lot in order to get time to value or to get to the insights they were wanting. So they wanted it a lot faster, but at the same time, fast and inaccurate is absolutely worse than slow and correct. And so they wanted us to be able to deliver something that was not only fast, but bulletproof accurate, no hallucinations, no possibility for them to be misled in any way. The information that we provide guides major decisions within organizations. And so they really couldn't get it wrong. And then the last thing that we heard a lot in our customer engagement survey is, we know that you know a lot about youth and we love you for that, but it'd be great if you knew a little bit more about us and our business, or at least our industry. And it's really hard for an organization like us. I mean, it's a full-time job staying up with the attitudes and behaviors of young people. And so learning the nuances of every different industry turned out to be, a bigger challenge than we thought. And of course, at some point, we will have hired people from various industries and we'll have that sort of sectoral specialization in our organization. But at this point, we're a small company. Folks wear a lot of hats. And so it's not possible for us to have an expert in every industry that we serve at this point. And so moving on to the next slide, as I said before, we kind of followed the guidance of DeepSet. And there's this great webinar. I highly recommend it to anybody. 5 steps to a successful Gen AI pilot. And we watched that video within a week of signing the contract with DeepSet, which really helped us a lot. We decided, okay, let's follow their advice. Let's set up our team in terms of their recommendations as to what roles various individuals will play. And across the team, we all watched the webinar. We looked at the various roles that we're recommending, and we decided, who's going to pick what role. And that really helped tremendously as we were going through the rollout. We were using a common language with DeepSet. We were able to identify who was playing what role in the organization, and it really sped things along for us in our deployment. And so in the end, on the next slide, what we developed was a generative AI retrieval augmented generation solution to allow people to ask questions and get answers immediately from our corpus of over 4,000 documents, articles, reports, transcripts from webinars. We threw it all into DeepSet, which indexed it. And even within the sandbox that DeepSet provided us, we knew we had a winning solution fairly quickly. We felt like within a week after throwing our corpus into the sandbox, that we were on the right path. I was showing board members, other stakeholders, the answers. People got really excited, and that the ability to sort of show things early, really built the confidence of the organization. Even my own leadership team was kind of split down the middle as to whether we should be going down the AI path this soon. Lots of risk. We could get it wrong. We could embarrass ourselves. And so having that sandbox right away and the ability to kind of test what we were doing as we were going along was really advantageous. If we go to the next slide, what's fueling all of the answers to the questions, again, the first half of the year, we wanted to focus on words. And the great news is we're incredibly verbose. We write an article every business day. We publish a report more often than once a week, 65 reports per region per year, so 130 reports. So lots of content. Um, we also took all of our webinars and transcribed what we'd said in our webinars and threw that into the mix. But definitely felt like what we would develop in the first half of the year would be just the beginning, because all of our information is derived from over 400,000 surveys, interviews with young people aged 13 to 39 across 7 countries. And what we wanted to be able to do was connect then to the data behind all of those reports and articles to be able to give clients the ability to dig deeper, get more granular. What do what do teen males in Germany think of this particular issue? Um, Unless we wrote those words in a report, it's not going to surface when we're just powered by words. But when we're powered by data, things get a lot more interesting from there. And then moving on to the next slide. um, really we found that the process for us was completely aided by DeepSet. In the course of 120 days, we prototyped a solution largely in the DeepSet sandbox. Additionally, we had the ability to select which LLM, and I can only imagine within large organizations how much time it would take to decide which LLM to use. With DeepSet, you could basically swap out LLMs with a click of a button. And so we were able to kind of test across multiple models. Might I also mention that, we've got as customers Meta and Microsoft and Apple. And so, we really had to be flexible and nimble to kind of create these customized pipelines to be able to respond to um, questions about what we were doing and why we were doing it that way. Certainly we rolled out into the marketplace leveraging ChatGPT 4.0 Turbo, but at the same time, we have the ability to show people, here's what the result is if we use something different. And so, is that better? Is that worse? It definitely is helpful to have that modularized approach that allows us to sort of switch things. And then I mentioned that we launched with 4.0 Turbo, but now we're running on 4 Omni, and basically that was a breeze. The reality is that we had to kind of go back to our prompt engineering and test our assumptions, and we did have to re-engineer our prompts as we made that movement. But there wasn't a whole lot of code that had to be written or changes that had to be made. We had the ability to test it in the sandbox, and then once we were comfortable that we had the prompts tuned properly for this new LLM, we were then able to deploy it overnight into the marketplace. And all of this, I might mention we prototyped, we alpha tested internally across our teams. We beta tested with customers. We had 74%, so nearly 3 in 4 of our customers tried our AI solution during the beta phase. And at points that was quite a lot of people, right, testing and hammering on this thing. We never had to worry about uptime. We never had to worry about responsiveness or latency. It was a bulletproof solution from day one that allowed us to get through a pretty onerous beta. We took and collected feedback, a survey of all of our customers following the beta, implemented their feedback for our launch product, launched that product in mid-June, and then had our first paying customer within a week of that. And so we basically had the kickoff meeting with DeepSet late February, and by mid-June, we'd gone through the full cycle of prototype, alpha test, beta test, respond to the beta test. Might I add that during that process, we weren't too sure what it would be costing us on a unit economics basis. And so we were able to see what our unit economic costs were when 74% of our customers were on the platform to help us model out what our pricing would be upon launch. That was tremendously helpful. And again, launched the product and now have paying customers. Our projections are that we'll have really deep penetration. We're making it an add-on to their current subscription, but folks are super excited about being able to use this tool to save them time and to save them money. If we want to go on to the next slide. Um, so returning back to the pain of speed, quality and relevance, what we found on the next slide when we deployed our solution was um, that the AI insights were generated in seconds. I mean, folks were blown away at how quickly we were able to, comb through 4,000 documents within our own corpus using DeepSet and be able to provide a solution. And of course, retrieval augmented generation, it combs through those documents, it grabs the most relevant parts of what we have in our corpus, and then feeds it on a 0-day retention basis through to an LLM, which is really important to us. Training an LLM is daunting, it's onerous, it's expensive. And we've been concerned from day one that we can't have our information leaching into the LLMs. There's no point in buying a YPulse subscription if everything that we know is can be answered by ChatGPT by a $20 a month user. And so, really that speed and that security were really important. Because it combs through the database and looks for relevant information in our corpus before feeding it into the LLM, it's really a zero hallucination environment. Um, if someone asks a question of our corpus and there's no information that we've provided, it basically just returns a, sorry, we couldn't find anything related to that within YPulse's documents. And so that really helps us on the accuracy side. I'm told by the lawyers not to say that it's a zero hallucination implementation, but again, we've been doing this for months. We tested it rigorously in the alpha phase, and we really couldn't make it misinform us. We would, fact check everything that it told us, and didn't find a single instance where the LLM was leading anyone astray. And then the great news is that it's not only everything that YPulse knows from our corpus, our documents, but it's everything that the LLM knows as well. And so when you ask a question, it knows the difference between a CEO and a social media marketing manager. And so if you in your question say, I'd like to help our CEO understand what Gen Z thinks about sharing their lives via photographs and videos, it's going to give you a different answer than if you say, I need to help our social media marketing manager understand. Equally, some of the best examples that we give are when someone says, hey, I work for this kind of company, what kinds of suggestions would you have in terms of how I could implement the insights? And so it's definitely contextualizing the responses based on what the user supplies in terms of their role and their industry. And so we're really, better than halfway there in terms of providing that sort of relevance that our customers were looking for. And then on to the next slide. The results kind of speak for themselves. Indexing 4,000 documents, supplying that into DeepSet and being able to answer questions off of that. 120 days is 4 months, and so we were able to launch this production-ready app with paying customers within that 120 days. We actually had the beta launched within 6 weeks, and so the heavy half of that 120 days was responding to what our customers thought, and they felt very gratified that during the beta phase they gave us feedback and we implemented all of it. So the production ready tool really looks a lot like what they wanted. It was really sort of interesting the way that this new tool reinvigorated our customers. We had an increase of 25% in terms of engagement during the beta process. People were coming back. We noticed people were coming back to ask the AI questions multiple times a day. It wasn't just oh, let me beta this, let me ask a question and then go away. They were coming back repeatedly. And again, nearly 3 of 4 of our customers did experience this. It became the second most popular feature on our website during the beta phase. And so definitely, customers responded to what we built and responded positively. And we did all this without increasing any headcount. Our team was basically who we had on board. Had we gone down different paths, there were tons of people that wanted to kind of learn their way through AI on our dime and give us a solution. But basically what we were able to do was produce a product without adding any headcount, just by leaning on our partnership with DeepSet. When we first started the process, we kind of felt like, rubes, naive. But by the end of the process, I mean, we fully understand what's going on. We fully understand what we're doing and how it works. And moreover, our weekly meetings with the folks from DeepSet really informed us. I participated in practically every weekly meeting just because I wanted to learn. I wanted to hear what they were saying. They were very, gracious and informative, educating us along the way. Um, and then there's internal benefits as well. We have a services team that will sometimes clients say, listen, I'm just too busy right now. I can't, I've got a problem. I need you to solve it for me. We found that our own internal teams were twice as efficient at getting what we call deep dives into our customers' hands just through the use of AI. They had to use the same tools our customers did, keyword search, hoping to get the right reports, reading through all those reports. With this AI Copilot now, not only does it give a brilliantly summarized synthesis of everything that we know, but links straight into not just the report to read, but the exact section of the report to read, so that you don't have to comb through a 30-page report. You can just look at the 2 pages that are relevant and then move on. And so definitely a huge success from our perspective in terms of an implementation. And if we want to go to the next slide. Um, definitely would say that our clients are coming on board. Since our first sale, we've had many more. Our chief customer officer is projecting a lot of additional sales, both this quarter and beyond, as folks renew. And then our sales team, boy, to have an AI demo at their side as we're introducing ourselves to potential new customers has been a huge boon. We've got lined up in the month of July as many sales opportunities, so contracts in front of clients, as many in July as we had in the first 6 months of the year. Now, part of that's no doubt economic, but another big part of that is the fact that this is a really sexy demo, and I feel like maybe in the past during our demos we were overwhelming potential clients with how much information we had. Like, I'm never going to get to all of that. They've got too much. And now with this AI Copilot, they can quickly see a pathway to getting their questions answered. In fact, we were always asked by potential clients if we could give them a trial. And it's really hard for us to do that. We're giving you access to 4,000 documents, and there's not a lot of ability for us to gate or limit how much you might download. But now what we're going to be doing in the next couple of weeks is giving the ability to trial just by having the AI interface. You can ask any question you want. Of course, you can't follow the links or download the reports, but you can see the wealth of information that we've got behind every question that you might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing with us, Dan. That was great to just learn through the process. Really quickly before we get into the Q&A, just a few resources if you want to learn more about building Gen AI applications. You can always visit us at deepset.ai, which is our website. But also, you can schedule a demo with us there. You can download our latest report. So we have recently released something with O'Reilly around how do you ensure LLM adoption in the enterprise. And our blog is always, we're always posting about the latest topics in our blog. So our most recent one is thinking in systems, not models, and what does compound AI mean to teams? So with that, I'll jump into the Q&A, and I'd love to actually just start with a few things. Dan, just how did you start to, how did you kind of justify AI to the company? I know you talked to the board about it, you had your skeptics, but how did you ultimately convince your team and the board of the business value of AI without a demo to show them in the beginning?
Yeah, there were a couple of things. One, at the board level, it was actually far easier than at the leadership level. The board felt that without an AI solution, we would cease to be relevant. And I do believe that they were right. Nobody's got time to read through all that we publish. And so, we would just slowly over time drift into obscurity as our customers abandon us for other solutions. So that was kind of easy at the board level. Now, the tricky part is, how do we execute? How do we implement? And that's where the leadership team comes in, and there were a lot of questions, right? Are we doing the right thing? We had no end of we'd been looking at this for about a year, no end of people that would like to help us. And whenever we asked them, have you done this before? Can you show us something that you've done before? The answer was always no. And so we're like, how are we going to move forward with a partner that can't even show us that they've done this before? In the case of DeepSet, we were able to see plenty of examples of things that they've done in the past, and are proud now that our implementation is one of the examples that they show when they're talking to new customers. So definitely would say, show me, right? That's what really convinced the leadership team. If you can show me something that looks like us and that solves the problem that we're having, that gives that use case of customers needing to get access to our information faster and with greater impact, then we're in. And we talked to a lot of people, and what we kept hearing over and over again is, DeepSet's investment in Haystack and their longevity in the field really had a lot of people that we trusted that knew a lot about the thing that we were trying to do. We kept getting pointed towards DeepSet, and I think that the investment in Haystack and the amount of time that DeepSet's been in the space really spoke volumes to folks that we trusted to be able to point us in the right direction. And then we fell into the webinars. I mean, I can say that being able to just send my leadership team a 1 hour webinar that says, listen, here's what we're thinking about doing, and here's an explanation of how it works. Again, there was no black box. There was just a lot of, helpful advice and education in terms of what it was that DeepSet does and how it does it.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. And actually related to that, some questions from the audience. Beyond that, how did you quantify the value of your solution early on? And then, so that's the first part of the question. And then second, after you launched, how did you ensure that you were collecting the data that you needed to evaluate app success and improve your pipeline and your models, et cetera?
Yeah. So beforehand, we're big fans of the quality of our own work. What we really wanted to know was that our work was showing through in the tool, right? We were a little nervous about that. In fact, one of the things that we did during the alpha stage that I would highly recommend to anybody, we had 20 reference questions, and we sat down with our editorial teams, with the folks that create this content, and we were like, listen, what are the 20 questions that this tool should be able to answer and answer accurately? And then after our editorial teams, define those 20 questions, we said, okay, great. You guys answer those 20 questions, right? So go ahead and tell us what the answer should be based on the fact that, you guys wrote all this stuff, and so they applied themselves to that. And then basically what we were able to do as we were looking at different LLMs and different aspects of the implementation is we would use those 20 reference questions, and we would ask those questions and see what the answer was, and then compare to what the editorial team had answered those questions. And so one of the things that brought us a lot of confidence in the data was, we were about 70% there from day one. No tuning, no nothing, right? So when we had 70% overlap between what the people that wrote the content said the answer should be and what the AI said the answer should be, we thought, okay, this is all just a matter of tweaking from this point. And it was at that point that I was demoing within a week to the board, showing them the solution, just because I was so confident, based on the benchmarking that we'd done with our benchmark questions and then the answers that our own team had provided. And then later on, we definitely had to rely on some tools like Pendo. We've got Pendo interlaced in our website. That's what sort of gave us a good sense of, who's using what on the site, what's the engagement level. We were able to see, not only who had asked the question, but what question they asked, and then what answer they got. And we definitely, quickly went through those during the beta period and scrutinized every one of them and decided, okay, was that the right answer? And what do we want to do to make sure that they do get the right answer? And of course, there's always some pleasant surprises. One of the questions that was asked was, what questions have you asked about a certain topic? And that's very different from what we put in our corpus. And so all of a sudden we had to take all of our survey content and feed it in so that we'd be able to say, okay, if the question is, what questions have we asked? That's different than what's the answer to the questions that we asked. And so um, the folks on the deep set team had to, sort of customize our node to be able to incorporate that, but it was really successful. Our customers really love that feature.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up, the question references. That's essentially, you can create experiments based off your own best practices and then run them through the pipelines in a programmatic way and get the responses and measure that performance. So, yeah, that's a great best practice. And also integrating your own product analytics, et cetera, makes total sense. I have another question around if you looked at other frameworks like LangChain, LlamaIndex, and Haystack, and I'll make a first comment that it's a bit of a different conversation because those are open source frameworks that help you build applications, typically Python code. And then DeepSec Cloud is more of like a developer tool and platform for teams to build on top of these frameworks. But I'm curious if you went down that path or what the needs of your specific team were in this process.
Yeah. I just want to preface it with our VP of engineering is German and from
Mhm.
Cologne. And so, his instinct is always find the open source tool that allows us to then, kind of leverage it. When we looked at, and we did look at Haystack and definitely saw that was a really assistive tool. And had we wanted to hire 2 to 3 people and get them, up to speed, I think that would have been a viable solution, but not in 120 days, it wouldn't. We really felt that we needed to move and move fast. We've got a temporary advantage in that we write a lot of words, but other people in our space have just as much data as we do. So we're working now on the sort of text to SQL, accessing the data in our Snowflake repository, and DeepSet's, they're quarterbacking that. We're just standing on the sidelines watching them make that play. But definitely would say that why we didn't go down the hey, let's go open source and figure it out ourselves is just speed to market. We wanted to get there faster.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I think, we saw earlier with some of these trend reports too, there's a lot of pressure right now for organizations to adopt AI quickly. But how do you do that safely? How do you do that in a way that's relevant to your end users? How do you cut down that time to production? I think that's what's going to make the difference right now with AI innovators versus AI laggards. And so I think, yeah, however you can get your team up to speed is super valuable. We had another question around just like how can you what steps should we take to ensure our data is AI ready, specifically how to prepare clean, structured data? This is probably a topic in and of itself.
Yeah.
So I think at a high level, it's starting with understanding, start with the data that you think is most important, whether it's the most pertinent to your business or it's most recent, fresh, et cetera. But I think, without getting too technical, understand what types of files that you're working with, then start to organize them into different ways because along the pipeline creation process, you'll use different file type classifiers. You'll then have to kind of bring in a converter to then make that into a searchable component. And then there's a lot of different other pre-processing tools and ways to then make that data more searchable within the pipeline. And the goal eventually is to kind of make that data work for you, make sure you understand what metadata you want to get out of each data set, as well as what you want to maybe apply to each of them. And just do your standard kind of like data cleanliness practices around how do you introduce the most standardized data? How do you make sure that it's relevant and accurate and just start testing? But Dan, I don't know if you have any learnings from
Yeah,
your journey
I
as
totally
well.
concur.
Yeah.
Initially it was, a bunch of PDFs and text files. What we learned quickly after that is that if we wanted to make that powerful, we needed to tag it quite a bit. So, out of WordPress, with the tags that we had in WordPress, and then a bit more tagging as we then loaded it into DeepSet. We are moving down this path of not just, focusing on our words, but on our data as well. And in that case, our first attempt will be on a portion of our data that doesn't change. It's called a brand tracker, and basically we track over 1,000 brands, their performance amongst young people. But I can tell you the columns are what the columns are, and they haven't changed in 5 years. And so that's giving us our first sort of attempt. Now there's a whole different bunch of data that changes like weekly. And so the columns aren't really fixed. And we think that we'll tackle that eventually. But for right now, we're kind of focused on the part of our data that absolutely doesn't change over time.
Yeah, no, that's a great best practice. And I think that's what the beauty is of this ecosystem of tools, though, is that people are thinking about these questions. They have kind of accounted for how do you process different types of data, multimodal? How do you process different quantities of data, whether they're kind of like larger documents or more or shorter, and how do you then kind of put those into an optimal chain so that you can eventually have the most optimal app. That's kind of pre-baked into DeepSec Cloud of those best practices, but there's certainly so many, you know, people are thinking about these problems, people are trying to solve them, and yeah, so many best practices out there. But great idea for another webinar topic for us. But yeah, we're at the hour, so I think that's all the questions that we can accommodate today. I think that we got pretty much all of them, but um, we can maybe just one more if we have time, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure.
Dan, how many people were involved um, in your building and maintenance of this project, and how many people moving forward on continuous training and fine tuning?
Yeah. So that initial 14 members was what took us through to the current phase that we're at, where we're using the LLM to sort of investigate the words. Now it's grown to 6 people as we move to the data. We've got a couple of data scientists, SQL experts that are leaning in now. Meanwhile, I'm leaning back. I'm so busy giving demos to customers and prospective customers that I don't make every weekly meeting. And I don't really understand what they're talking about, quite honest, when they're talking about Snowflake and SQL queries. So, at this point, we've still got a team of 4 or 5 people involved in the weekly calls with DeepSet, and I'm backing away as this really lights a fire in the marketplace.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for joining us and sharing all your insights today. It was really fascinating to hear. And thank you to our audience for joining us as well. This webinar will be posted so you can share it with your teams. And as always, please reach out to us with any questions you have. We're happy to answer. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.